South Africa has a violent crime problem, and the South African Police Service, the institution that is tasked with combating crime, seems to be woefully inadequate in its ability to reduce violence and criminality in our society. Joining me to discuss these problems and also some potential solutions to our crime problem is Ian Cameron. He is with Action Society, which is a civil society group which is lobbying to reform the way in which the criminal justice system operates in South Africa and to restore law and order to the country. Ian Cameron, welcome to Solutions with David Ansara.
Thanks, David.
So Ian, let's start off just with a bit of personal background about yourself and also Action Society, which you've been instrumental in founding. Could you just give us a bit of background to the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time in the community safety space over the past 10, almost 12 years now, and looked into the community safety world quite a bit. So a lot of focus on rural safety, land grabs, the whole land expropriation without compensation issue, and really a major focus on how communities can safeguard themselves within the framework of the law, while the government is unfortunately often failing to safeguard communities. So really jumped into that. In terms of Action Society, joined the organization quite recently and actively involved in their campaign, not only for the fight against gender-based violence in South Africa, but also mobilizing communities more actively or guiding communities to show them what they can and can't do when it comes to defending their lives and livelihoods. And obviously we've got quite a firm stance that the police need to be chosen on merit and that communities must form the foundation of community safety in South Africa, or rather the fight against crime. And then just on the side, I'm very involved with firearms.co.za. And it's a platform that was created with the idea to share more in terms of the whole firearm world in South Africa, which is obviously quite a very much spoken about one at the moment when we think of the possible Firearm Control Act changes.
Okay, great. Well, I think we'll unpack a lot of those themes in our discussion today. So maybe, Ian, let's just look at some of the violent crime trends in South Africa, just so that we have a sense of the scale of the problem. How bad is violent crime in South Africa at the moment?
It's very bad. I'm actually scrolling through a few things here in front of me. Just in terms of the gender-based violence issue, I like to use that as an example. I think it's something that's quite commonly spoken about at the moment. We have probably about 116 rapes per day in South Africa. Only 1 in 9 rapes are reported. Obviously, thousands and thousands of these incidents occur without successful prosecution actually taking place. Less than a 7% successful prosecution rate when it comes to GBV, specifically sexual assault and rape cases. And to add insult to injury, we've got the whole issue of the DNA backlog. Now, I've really zoomed in on the GBV part. If we go look at something like robbery with aggravated circumstances, attempted murder, those types of things, these crimes have increased quite a bit over the last few years. Obviously, COVID had quite an impact on it decreasing at the first very strict levels of lockdown. And then as soon as that lessened, we immediately saw the increase again. A lot of people were very worried when they heard the last quarterly crime stats come out. But it's important to understand that the lockdown had a major impact. So it's not as though crime suddenly increased so much. It is actually just the crime we had before lockdown. But it also goes to show that the government is actually able to do something.
Okay, so Ian, those are some pretty significant challenges. Obviously, there's been this reversion to the mean in terms of our crime statistics. But I mean, anecdotally, and certainly in terms of the work that you've been doing, it seems that there are some really significant challenges in terms of the South African Police Service. They just seem incapacitated at the moment, underfunded, under-resourced, and also just incapable of enforcing basic law and order. What is happening with our police service? Why is it failing to do its job?
There are a few reasons for this. I think it's firstly crucial that we look at Bheki Cele himself, the current Minister of Police in South Africa. So in June of 2012, he was actually fired as the then National Commissioner of Police, and there was corruption and a lot of other things being spoken about at the time. He was then removed, but now he's the Minister of Police. So it just carries on to add insult to injury when we see the way that the police is managed. Apart from that, we've got a serious issue with political interference and merit appointments in the police. So now we've got this rotten apple in terms of leadership. Very often we see that cadre deployment really takes or gets sped up as soon as a certain person is appointed as a national commissioner or as a minister of police. So eventually you've got this whole political cadre at the top structure of the police, and below that you've got a few strong merit-appointed police officials that have just stuck through it and just carrying on. But unfortunately, they're not led to success because the police, whether we like it or not, is actually being abused as an iron fist of the governing party in the country. I've given a very broad answer, but I think it paints the picture.
All right, Ian. Well, one of the major problems within the SAPS is also in their investigative ability. So not just on the street enforcement, but particularly their forensic capacity has been greatly diminished. And you've been campaigning around the problems with the DNA registry, the electronic database that has been implemented within the SAPS at great cost. There's something like 300,000 DNA samples that are kind of clogging the system, that there's a massive backlog. Could you explain to our viewers and listeners what the problem is there?
Yeah, so the DNA backlog is a major cause for concern. It not only delays justice, but it's going to deny justice and already has denied justice to thousands of people. It simply means that we currently have a backlog of about 300,000 cases. That means that for each case, you have got probably an average of around 4 samples that need to be processed. So that equals 1.2 million samples that we've got a backlog with at forensic centers currently. And it also then means that it's going to take even longer for perpetrators to be arrested and obviously then convicted, should it even get that far. On top of that, the PCAM system, which is the Property Control and Exhibit Management System of the police, was switched off by Forensic Data Analysis, which is an external company, because of non-payment. So that means that a further 8 million pieces of evidence cannot be referenced or found at the moment because of the PCAM system being shut down. And these two kind of run close to each other, because obviously, you know, you've got DNA on the one side, then you've got other evidence on the other side, and both of these components can play a major role in making sure that prosecution or conviction takes place properly and that the right thing happens. So incredibly worrying, and it really does have an impact on all of us, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, and obviously many of those DNA samples will be for instances of sexual assaults. So that has a huge impact on our ability to deal with sexual crimes. But now we are speaking in October, Ian, and only a few months ago we had the riots in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. Do you think that this was a culmination of the police's inability to deal with criminality in our society?
So it's important to say that I think the major reason for what happened was infighting in the ANC, and it just further highlighted the total lack of capacity, resources, skills, political willpower in the South African Police Service to really sort out a situation like that. I think to just give further depth, I mean, South Africa in the last 10, 11 years has lost 80% of its reservist police members, which means that it's 60,000 people that could have been wearing uniform during that unrest. Now, obviously, all 60,000 wouldn't have been in KZN necessarily. The point is just there are so many cheap and easily accessible, or simply manageable solutions that we could have used to prevent these types of things. And this has just shown that the police are going in their own direction. There's no attempt to have synergy with South African citizens on ground level. And I feel very sorry for a lot of the members on ground level, the ones that wear the uniform, because during the KZN unrest, I spoke to quite a few of those cops, and it was very worrying to hear that they didn't have enough ammunition. They didn't have food and water. They were just simple things that government could not do right during that time. Now, if that happened for only a week, imagine if we face the types of riots that we're seeing in Eswatini at the moment, what an impact that could have. So it's very worrying to see, and it highlights the total collapse of the South African police service.
And in the immediate aftermath of the riots, we had Gideon Joubert on the podcast, and he was talking about the need for communities to fill that vacuum that has been left by the state. So community action groups, community policing forums, those kinds of on the ground, very highly localized and dispersed kinds of bodies. What is your view, because you're in the community safety space as well? How can communities start to come together to protect their neighborhoods and their families?
So it's, to give an idea, we've actually gotten a lot of flack over the years because we encourage the idea that communities need to take charge when it comes to their safety in their on their streets. A lot of people say, "Oh, but are you encouraging vigilantism or people taking the law into their own hands?" And we say no. We're actually opening up a space or filling a niche that's been left by government, as you mentioned. So firstly, I think it's crucial that communities know that within the current legislation or legislative network, or rather framework in South Africa, there's ample space for communities to patrol, to spend time on the streets, to make sure that they can be the eyes and ears of law enforcement. And where communities build that strong, healthy relationship with law enforcement in an area, we very often see that crime then decreases, and it actually just strengthens the camaraderie on ground level when it comes to fighting crime. So obviously we encourage it. I think, unfortunately, for the past 40, 50, even 60 years in South Africa, the idea has constantly been that government will look after you. Government will sort things out. Government will provide safety, whether police, whether military services, etc., etc. And it's kind of, bred this constant this constant neediness from citizens that we can just stand and wait with open hands or open arms for government to give us more, whether it's a grant or whatever the service or the freebie might be. Whereas we're saying, but you need to take charge, you need to take responsibility for your safety. Once you do that, you can start safeguarding your community as well. I think firstly, communities need to make sure they've got a communication network, whether it's per cell phone app or two-way radios. It doesn't matter. I prefer the two-way radio type of system, but the point is communities need to be able to communicate with each other. They need to be able to share information with each other, to be on the lookout for suspicious behavior or suspects themselves, and they can then share that with trustworthy law enforcement officials and take note, trustworthy law enforcement officials. This doesn't mean we need to share everything and anything with all police. Unfortunately, those days are long gone. But it's important to build that relationship. So firstly, communication. Secondly, get out on the street, form a network, a group of people in the community, a minimum of 2 people per vehicle, or if you're patrolling by foot, 100% as well. Same with a bicycle, which many communities have started doing, and spend that time of being visible in the community. Just tomorrow, I'm going to a part of the Cape Flats, which is considered a red zone at the moment, and that has serious gang violence issues. Just yesterday, they picked up another body in one of the parks there, and if you spend time there and you listen to the neighborhood watchers and specifically the walking bus members, which was an initiative started by the city of Cape Town, it's amazing to see how violence, in especially where kids get caught in crossfire in those specific areas, has decreased because of these walking bus initiatives and these ladies that escort the kids to school. So I think that's a very practical example. So it's communication, being active, and then getting trained. And if those three things happen in the right way, you're going to start getting a nice rhythm of community safety initiatives.
Okay, and obviously during the riots, there was a high amount of disorder and chaos, but we saw many of these community groups who were legally armed citizens coming together to man the barricades and to defend their property and their loved ones. What is the importance, in your view, of responsible firearm ownership? I'm not a gun owner myself, but I think it's very important to have that diffusion of power in society. And there are also some challenges, some threats to gun ownership that are on the horizon as well. Could you inform our viewers and listeners about those, for those who don't know the precise details of that?
Yeah, let's again get back to the practicality. So in South Africa, it takes an average of 21 minutes for the police to respond, and that's in an urban area. So in a rural area, even in urban areas, they very often don't respond at all. If that's the average reaction time, what are you going to do in those 21 minutes? Are you going to ask the robber or attacker to just hang on a sec because the police are on their way? It simply doesn't work that way. So in South Africa, in a South African context, you are, in most cases, and I would say more than 95% of cases, you are the first and you are your last line of defense. And for that reason, you need to know how to defend yourself. And it's quite simple. What we say from Action Society's point of view is that if you can defend yourself successfully, you can defend your family. And once you can defend your family, you can defend your neighbors. And when neighbors start defending each other, then you're actually protecting an entire community. And that's the mindset we need to develop. Crucial for more people in South Africa to have firearms, or at least know that they've got access to them, to get trained with them. If they're not comfortable with a firearm, do something else, but get some kind of mechanism that you can partake in the community safety drive. And remember that sequence: defend yourself, family, neighbors, and then your community.
But now, in the legislative realm, the Firearms Control Amendment Bill, that's still before Parliament. What is the proposal there, and what impact would that have on legal rights to firearm ownership in this country?
So there are quite a few things that it entails, but I think the one that worries me the most, and I think people might criticize me for just highlighting that so much, is the self-defense side. The fact that you wouldn't be able to apply for a firearm license for specifically self-defense. It's astounding. I mean, we've got an annual increase of murder in South Africa. We've had an annual increase for more than half a decade now. And in the same breath, government wants to say it's the sole responsibility of the South African Police Service to keep you safe. That in a country with one of the biggest private security industries in the world, never mind Africa, and it just simply doesn't make sense. So I think there's a major pushback on that. I know there were hundreds of thousands of submissions where people really made their voices heard about the FCA amendments, and we need to see what comes out of it. I just know that it's not a fight that's going to end anytime soon. I think it's a deliberate attempt from the ANC to get their hands on your property. It just makes logical sense to me. You disarm your law-abiding populace, and then you can actually do with their property whatever you like. And if you look at the very extreme way that they've started saying certain things on public platforms, it certainly makes sense.
So Ian, you mentioned the work that you're doing now that you've moved down to the Western Cape, working directly with communities. And last week on the podcast, we had Jordan Hill-Lewis, the DA's mayoral candidate for the city of Cape Town. And I posed some of these questions around community safety to him. And he was very quick to point to some of the successes that the city's had in terms of the metals theft unit that it's established, as well as the Law Enforcement Advancement Plan, the LEAP program, which is basically putting provincial and city boots on the ground, trying to deal with instances of violent crime in areas like Grassy Park and others, which have been really beset by gang violence. And I noticed that you wrote an article on News 24 recently talking about the importance of the devolution of the police to the provincial level, and using the Western Cape as a kind of a test case or a pilot for this kind of dissemination of police powers to the more local level. What are some of your proposals there, and how do you think that those could play out in the Western Cape?
Yeah, so firstly, I think the major thing would also be important, or the major thing to also mention is that we fully support the way that the Western Cape government, specifically City of Cape Town, has gone about the LEAP unit development, and I think that's the direction to go into. I think using that as a foundation or a starting point is important, because it goes to show that you actually get what you vote for. Now, with that, I'm not promoting a specific party, but what I am saying is that it's the only province in the country where we've seen this type of development actually occurring, successfully happening, despite the fact that South African Police Service is failing, and not just failing, literally falling apart. How do we see it playing out? I think we see it playing out that we can then manage resources far more accurately. We can pick up the pieces when it comes to the 5,000 vacancies in the South African Police Service in the Western Cape, and we can make sure that resources are given to people in the right places where they need it. Unfortunately, we don't see appropriate resource management currently in the South African Police Service. The anti-gang unit in the Western Cape was disbanded not long ago by Becky Tele. And obviously that means that we're just facing even more gang violence, and that many of these communities are left on their own. So if it is not, or if the devolution does not take place, it simply means more people will die at the hands of the current ruling party. It is that simple. We need to find that type of system that can work. Just lastly, David, something that's important. You mentioned Grassy Park. Now, Grassy Park has 1,800 people per police member, and the UN average is about 200 per police member. So they are way, way, way ahead of anyone else in South Africa. In fact, it's probably the worst ratio in the country. And one must ask whether this is not a deliberate campaign by the ruling party, and specifically national government, to make things more difficult in the Western Cape.
Yeah, and obviously Schedule 4 of the Constitution, which I have here, talks about the exclusive competencies of the provinces and the shared competencies being health and education and so on. But Section 146 of the Constitution also deals with conflicting laws. So 1461 says that it applies to conflict between national legislation and provincial legislation, falling within a functional area listed in Schedule 4. And then subsection 2 says national legislation that applies uniformly with regard to the country as a whole prevails over provincial legislation. And it lists a number of conditions there. So obviously there are some pretty significant legal and constitutional obstacles to that. But, I think political pressure can work in terms of driving more of an impetus towards devolution. And we now see the DA kind of responding to that, including a private members bill that's been put before Parliament to enact referenda at the provincial level. So they're clearly seeing the need to more aggressively assert the interests of the province and also the City of Cape Town.
The point is, we need to just get it done. We mustn't wait for the South African Police Service or for the ANC to give us the go-ahead, because that's never going to happen. So if we want to build a sustainable future, we need to get it done. We need to get communities involved. We need to mobilize them. And we need to develop more law enforcement advancement programs. The more of those we have in the country, the safer more people will be. And if we do that, we can also decrease corruption in law enforcement in South Africa, because it's as simple as the basic rule of competition, that if we've got different enforcement agencies that work close by or close to each other, there's a natural thing between humans that we want to compete, and the one wants to be better than the other. So they keep each other accountable. It's almost like cross-pollination. They keep each other accountable. The one points fingers to the other. And I don't think it's an unhealthy system if it's managed in the right way. So it's just to add to that, we need to simply just get it done. Just start somewhere and build the alternative system instead of waiting for the ruling party to do something, because they are not going to.
Yeah, I think instead of, as Jordan Hill-Lewis said, waiting for permission or clarity from national government, initiate those projects from the bottom up and see how they develop. And I think there's great potential there. But maybe, Ian, let's do a thought experiment. Imagine that policing was devolved down to the provincial level, and you were appointed the provincial minister of police under these new powers. What would be your 5-year plan? What would you do to reverse some of the crime problems in the Western Cape?
So I think there are 3 or 4 specific points. The first one is I would really push back to community policing, and I'm not talking the normal sector policing type of system. I would jump in with communities, get them trained, and give them some form of statutory power as well, almost like a reservist kind of system. It would just not be formed under the South African Police Service, but rather under the Metro or Provincial Police Department. On top of that, I would strengthen bylaws and the powers that bylaw units and law enforcement units hold when it comes to policing, that we are not completely dependent on the South African Police Service, or that we just need to hand over suspects to them, but we're actually building an alternative system. Furthermore, I think it's important that we build a provincial forensic capacity, that we're not dependent on the South African Police Service for that, and that we use municipal courts more accurately, or rather in a better way to try and handle better handle the backlog that courts in South Africa face. So we can use municipal courts far easier for things like abalone poaching, different narcotic offences, and even more violent crimes. I think those are the first few things. Otherwise, I think it's crucial to bring back specialist units. We need specialist units in law enforcement in South Africa. Jackie Salebi was the one that started with the disbanding of them when he was the National Commissioner of the South African Police Service. And obviously, it's very worrying, and we never saw something that came back. So we need the type of almost like the Scorpion type of unit that we used to have, something that keeps police accountable, but that also has some form of criminal law role to play when it comes to not only the arrest but also the prosecution of serious offenders in South African society.
And I mean, at the time, the Scorpions, I think, were just being punished for doing their job effectively, which is fighting corruption. But I think there was one criticism which I thought may have been valid, was that it conflated the investigative and the prosecutorial powers into one body, whereas traditionally those entities are separated. Do you think that that's necessarily a problem to have that high concentration of power in one institution like that?
I would be very careful of unnecessarily centralizing all powers. I think, then you're kind of pushing back into what the ANC has done, and it could be quite risky. So it's crucial that you make sure that you've got the right checks and balances in place, and that everything doesn't just fall under one body, because we need to keep each other accountable. If that should happen, you have that risk that you currently have with the South African Police Service and the prosecuting authority, where the one just actually aids the other in their complete failure. And we need to make sure that we've got a healthy system with that. That being said, something like the Western Cape Police Ombudsman is a great success in the Western Cape that really helps a lot. The Western Cape Department of Community Safety have a watching brief unit that attends court cases all over the province, and it is shocking to see the results of that. I went through one of the reports last week, and it shows you how many cases are struck off the roll because a docket never made it to the police, never made it to court, or the DNA sample wasn't available yet, or the DNA report wasn't available yet. And all of these things add on to the reasons why we need a different system, because trying to fix the South African police service, I think, is a never-ending disaster, and we need to build an alternative as soon as possible.
So Ian, on this show, we've often discussed the importance of decentralization, subsidiarity, moving things down to the local level, because those communities understand the particular conditions that exist in their immediate environment. But, there is one risk of empowering community groups, is that you could have runaway vigilantism, that people go too far. They get carried away with those powers. So how can we make sure that we also check the worst excesses of that, while still maintaining some of the benefits of community safety that we spoke about earlier?
So I think there must be different levels of it. You've got your reservist type of level, where a community member actually provides policing services without charge, and they have to work a certain amount of hours per month or per week. And they can perform the services of a police or other law enforcement official. That then means that specific person falls under the same set of rules as any police official would. So I think that's the one level, and that's the highest kind of statutory power. And I think it's important that that's built out to specialist units as well. That shouldn't just be at station level. On top of that, then you've got underneath that, you would have community safety structures, which would typically have neighborhood watches, and amongst them, you might have first responders that are trained and taught how to handle serious offenses. How do they approach a scene? How do they cordon off a scene to make sure that, for example, evidence isn't contaminated, etc., etc., and that they are trained well and they've got a strong code of conduct that they are held to and that they're held responsible. Apart from that, you've got your general communication structure, and I would say this is the most basic part of it. Is literally the part where communities are simply eyes and ears. They play no other function, and they also don't react to incidents. They only communicate with each other. We found that if someone has a strong code of conduct, and that where training is constantly repeated, developed, improved, it really does work very, very well to keep people accountable, and you have little or no issue with the vigilantism type of problem. I think vigilantism obviously or often sticks its head out where government fails completely, and there's a total lack of any alternative or any other initiative that could have helped them, and therefore people get completely carried away when it comes to trying to combat serious and violent crime.
So Ian, your background is also very much in rural safety, and that is an ongoing problem in South Africa. We've seen many attacks on the farming community, and there are many risks associated with that, including food security risks, but also just as a human rights issue, that's a very grave problem. What are some of your reflections on your time spent in that area of safety and security? I mean, are we winning that battle against farm murders?
Absolutely not. I think the farm murder dynamic is something that's also changed a bit over the last 3 to 5 years, more or less. I would say that we've seen an increase in farm workers also being violently attacked by perpetrators, and often farm workers are held hostage or threatened that if they don't provide information on the farmer, they would be hurt even more. So there are a few changing dynamics and so on and so forth, but we're certainly not winning the battle. I think something that is positive is the fact that the farming community is fighting back the way that they are. There's often a perception created by the ruling party that the farm worker grouping and the farmer grouping are two different entities. But from my experience on ground level, in the majority of cases, the two actually work together very, very well, and they really do care for each other. In many cases, it's actually a bit of a family dynamic, and it's positive to see how farmers and workers alike are not standing back when it comes to violent crime. They are getting trained. They are learning how to defend themselves and their families, and obviously each other. And this is helping to certainly safeguard certain areas. From a government point of view, there's been no replacement of the commando system that was also disbanded in Jackie Selebi's time. and obviously with specialist units also being disbanded, there's really no special function when it comes to policing rural areas. As I mentioned earlier, 21 minutes average reaction time South African Police Service in urban areas. So you can imagine how exploited a lot of these communities in rural areas must feel when it comes to policing and their own safety.
Yeah, and you used to be involved in security with AfriForum. And, that I think is an interesting example of a civil society group that has been able to take over many failing state functions. And, perhaps you could also just share some of the details of the work that you did with AfriForum, because I think it, perhaps shows what can also be achieved at scale as well.
Absolutely. So I think the AfriForum model is the only one of its kind at, with that specific scale, where they've got branches across the country that take responsibility for certain portfolios. Now, in terms of community safety, they've, I stand to be corrected, but it's just over 150 community safety structures in the country, with a whole national network of communication structures as well that assist those networks. On a branch level, they focus on local government and environmental affairs. And I think environmental affairs, local government, and community safety are most likely the three major umbrella issues that we've got in the country. And they then try and specialize these branches to do that. Now, it's not quite at a point where they can, for example, maintain an entire municipality's sewage works or a waste landfill site, that type of thing. But they've launched many successful campaigns when it comes to the cleaning up of, for example, a landfill site that is not being managed correctly by a municipality, or when it comes to fixing a sewage pump or a sewage plant that isn't functioning properly. And I think it's a step in the right. It's absolutely a step in the right direction. And I think the more entities take it upon themselves to build the sustainable future without waiting for the nod from the South African government, specifically national government, the better.
And just in terms of your work going forward now, Ian, I mean, what's on your immediate to-do list? How are you going about advancing your cause?
So we've got, in terms of Action Society, we've got a very exciting project that we'll announce quite soon that we're busy with, and it basically looks at the oversight of specific kinds of violent crime cases. So we'll communicate more detail about that quite soon. We're busy with a whole series of information pieces that will be provided to communities in the assistance to further develop them when it comes to community safety. And we're testing a training model, and that's where I'm actually going tomorrow in the Cape Flats, in some of the very, very, or rather the most dangerous gang-ridden areas in South Africa, where we want to see, and specifically where women and children are threatened, what we can do to better safeguard them. So that's the direction that we're aiming in at the moment. Action Society has got a pretty good growth curve at the moment. Unfortunately, we've jumped into a court case, which I'm saying unfortunately because we didn't want it to go that far. We hoped that government would actually act. But we're actually busy now consulting with our legal team to take the government to court concerning the Convicted Offender Amendment Bill, which is obviously also a very important piece of legislation that we want passed to ensure further justice in the country.
So, Ian, I had on the show Phil Craig of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, and he's a strong proponent of Cape secession. And in the absence of devolution of power, a more federalized system, which I think I'm a strong advocate of. Do you think that is a realistic or a viable proposal for the Western Cape to go its own way? And would that have any potential scope for changing the way that community safety and crime is treated in that part of the world?
Look, I'm unashamedly in support of it. I think it's a very, very good thing, and I think the sooner it happens, the better. I don't think it's a question of if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen, but I think there's going to be a massive fight still with the national government, specifically the ANC, when it comes to that. they want to centralize power and they want to abuse power. So obviously they would be opposed to it. But I'm a firm supporter of that federal government type of ideal. In fact, I wouldn't mind if the Western Cape is completely a country on its own later on. I think we're going to see more and more specialized types of career paths moving to the Western Cape, focusing on developments, local developments in the province. It's very interesting to see how the local economy is far stronger in parts of the Western Cape than other parts in the country, even during lockdown, which goes to show that the Western Cape government have really, even though not faultless, have done a lot more to try and keep the economy alive compared to many other parts of the country. In terms of law enforcement, I think one of the major things that will stand out is the fight against gang violence in the province. Obviously, it's a major problem. And I honestly believe that without the ANC running things, there will be an improvement. I don't think you can easily get worse than the ANC in South Africa at the moment. But let me not emphasize that too much. Let me not speak too quickly.
Have you heard about the EFF, Ian?
Yeah, well, yeah. Luckily, they still. Well, let me rather not comment. I think it's the lesser of two evils, and hopefully, the Western Cape has a successful way forward. Should they be able to successfully, do their own thing.
And do you see yourself in your work contributing at all to that cause?
I think if there's a possibility of us working together, we would obviously do that. I mean, our main focus is community safety, and we want more people to get actively involved in community safety structures, not necessarily as part of Action Society, but we obviously support all community safety structures in the country. We've advised many of them throughout the July riots in KZN and Gauteng. We advised many of them and assisted them with quite a few legal issues or threats that they had. And we will continue doing that. But if there's a way for us to assist in any way to promote the idea of a federal type of system, then we would certainly do so.
Ian Cameron, I wanted to thank you very much for a very stimulating discussion. And I think safety and security are really at the bottom of that Maslow's pyramid. They are the core foundations of a free and prosperous society. So I really wish you all the best in your endeavors and in your work. And thank you for joining me on Solutions with David Ansara.
Thanks a lot, David. Have a good one. Thanks for the chat.
If you enjoyed this content and you're watching on YouTube, please do give this video a like and subscribe to the channel, and also leave your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you're listening on your preferred podcast platform, please subscribe there as well, and also leave a 5-star review. That really helps the show to grow. My name is David Ansara. Until next Sunday, take care.